Once upon a mundane morning, Barb's day got busy without warning. A realtor in need of an open house sign. No, 50 of them, and designed before 9.
My head hurts.
Any mighty tools to help with this plight?
Aha!
Barb made her move. She opened Canva and got in the groove.
Bulk creating Canva sheets. Create 50 signs fit for suburban streets.
Done in a click, all complete.
Sweet!
Now, imagine what your dreams can become when you put imagination to work at canva.com.
Welcome back, Universal fans. For those of you who've kept Jim Hill Media's Universal podcast feed loaded and subscribed, I sincerely thank you. It's obviously been several years since we've had a podcast dedicated to the Universal theme parks, but as anyone who listens regularly to the Disney Dish podcast knows, the doings at NBC Universal and Comcast have been discussed. By the way, if you're new to this channel, please allow me to introduce myself. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and I have been covering themed entertainment for over 40 years now. For those of you who don't know, I've been podcasting with Len Testa, who you might know from Touring Plans, for more than a decade now. He and I will actually be recording our 500th show together sometime later this year, and while the name of that podcast is Disney Dish, we do talk about the Universal parks on that show quite a bit. Which brings us to the question of the day. Why now? Why, after all this time, is Jim Hill Media bringing back a dedicated Universal podcast? Well, I plan on telling you that, but first, the news portion of this week's Epic Universal podcast is brought to you by TouringPlans.com. Touring Plans can help you save time and money at theme parks like the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World. So if you're looking for help when it comes to planning your next excursion to Orlando, which perhaps could include a trip to Universal, please check them out at TouringPlans.com. So, getting back to the Universal podcast, we're getting underway here. Let's just say that this podcast is going to be a bit unique. Something different from the other podcasts you can hear on the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network. I mean, if you take a look at the other shows, Disney Dish is myself swapping stories with the brilliant Len Testa. No denying he's a certified Disney theme park expert. I mean, his name is literally at the bottom of, the best-selling Walt Disney World planning book. And when I chat with Drew Taylor over on Fine Tuning, I'm talking with a guy who's regularly interviews the biggest and the best when it comes to animation, animators, directors, actors. Drew knows his stuff. Whereas Brian Gaughan and I, when we sit down to talk about Star Wars and Lucasfilm, look, Brian's been on actual Hollywood sets. He lives and works in LA, has worked with people who've developed films. So he knows a little bit about movies, especially those George Lucas movies that we all love. And, of course, we can't overlook the late, great Aaron Adams, who was a virtual encyclopedia when it came to Marvel. He read the comics, owned the movies, and trust me, if you'd ever been to his home, the Marvel memorabilia that was up on his wall was stunning. And I should also mention that Len and I are now working with veteran Imagineer Jim Schul on our Disney Unpacked project. So again, it was a guy who's been in the room with Michael Eisner and Bob Iger, when, some of your favorite Disney theme park attractions were pitched. So those are the people I work with. So now that you've heard about the other part of the Jim Hill Media Network, let's talk about what we're about to do with Universal. And this podcast, as I said at the start, is going to have a different approach. So what if I told you that my co-host in the show, unlike everybody else that I just mentioned, is not an expert? In fact, he's never, ever been to Universal theme park. Okay, don't turn off the show. Don't unsubscribe. Hear me out. Eric Hersey, the gentleman I will be introducing to you shortly, it's quite an interesting story. And in fact, there's probably a few of you or people you know who are very much like him. As I mentioned, Eric has never been to a Universal theme park. But can you guess how often this Wheeling, West Virginia native has taken family vacations to Walt Disney World since 2014? No, too low. Keep going. Over 30 times. And that might not seem like a ton if you're a Florida native, somebody who lives in Kissimmee. But think about this. He has packed his family of 5 up in a van, driven 16 hours to visit a resort that is literally miles away from Universal, not once ever deciding to skip a day at Walt Disney World to check out what Universal is all about. Okay, if we're doing the math here, folks, that's an average of 3 trips a year, 15 park days, and not once has he sampled Universal. So what makes this guy qualified to co-host a podcast about the Universal parks? Well, it's quite simple. Eric has been helping with Jim Hill Media for over a year now. He's jumped in and helped with our Disney Unpacked project and even helped produce a few of our other podcasts. And a few months ago, during a routine, Zoom call on one of our projects, Eric asked me about Universal. He couldn't help but notice that about the many things that are happening at the Universal Orlando Resort. And he was curious enough to think about foregoing one of his Disney trips to make a dedicated trip to Universal. And I couldn't help but think, now, here's a guy that was tribal to the bone. I mean, if this guy has his office decorated to look like the Magic Kingdom's utilidors, with purple and blue walls, I mean, if Eric is thinking about Universal, I bet there are tons of other Disney fans out there who are going to be asking similar questions, and they will need a place to go to get their news and information. And who will ask the best questions to help out these newfound Universal fans? Maybe a brand new Universal fan himself? So, with that being said, let's introduce Eric Hersey to this show. Eric?
Well, thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's nice to be on a Zoom call where we actually have the red recording button actually going. We're actually talking to other people besides you and I, bantering back and forth about random projects and so forth. But thanks so much for letting me have access to somebody that knows a ton about Universal. This is a great opportunity for me to talk to someone that's been covering it for so long. So, I mean, there's no better master if I'm going to be a Padawan.
No, I mean, look, I can't, in fact, that's one of the reasons I sparked to this idea. I backed into my knowledge of Universal because I was a Disney fan. And in fact, to be honest, I don't think I really got serious about studying up on Universal till 88, 89, when they announced that they were building their resort in Florida. I mean, I had been to Universal Studios Hollywood. I had done the tram tour. But here they were coming to Disney's turf. And it was like, okay, it's kind of Butch Cassidy and, the Sundance Kid. Who are those guys? What's the deal with them? And so I have been studying the company for, what is that? That's 34 years. That was then, and this is now. This is a company that is firing on all cylinders. In fact, when we get to the news portion of today's show, we're going to talk about how much this show is firing on cylinders. But anyway, let's talk a little bit more about you and let people know, more about you, and for that, let's establish your street cred here if we can.
Well, I was going to say, the fact is, it sounds probably odd. And I know if I was listening on the other end and saying, all right, here's a guy that has never been to Universal, what's he going to show us? Well, let me just tell you this, guys. I have listened to every single one of Jim Hill podcasts. Notice that my fandom kind of started for theme park in generals, and in this case, Disney theme parks in about 2014. Do the math. I think you guys are around 10 years old, going on to 500 episodes. You were one of the initial podcasts that I found and kind of was like, oh my goodness, history. I love this stuff. And I dove right into the Walt Disney World. But I think it's interesting right now and I think you and Len might have mentioned this on other shows, is Universal now actually has some nostalgia, right? It's old enough now that people like me who love the, hey, what was here before that? And this extinct attraction and so forth. It's now to the point where I remember seeing on Nickelodeon per se at the end, the bumper saying this was filmed at Universal Studios, Florida. And now I'm interested. I'm certainly interested. And I like those old stories. And that's kind of what hooked me into Disney. And I think now Universal can really leverage some of that and probably grab some of the attention of people like myself who want to read these old books or so forth to find out, hey man, what was it like when it first opened and what happened in 1992? So part of me is I know enough about theme parks through, the last 10 years because I really dove in. I read books. I've obviously read a lot of articles, listened to entirely too many podcasts, and I'm a huge consumer of YouTube videos and love all the content creators out there. I'm super excited to kind of get that rejuvenated feeling of, oh, I didn't know that. But Universal, the world is open, and that excites me tremendously.
No, like I said, I feel like this is an interesting way to do a podcast about Universal, and especially at this time in the company's history. That in fact, I think Len and I have talked about this on Disney Dish. That you look at the last 10 years, for example, at the Disney parks, and look, Disney isn't necessarily subtle about this. If you look at Pandora, the world of Avatar, or for that matter, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, those two additions to the parks were Disney's response to what was going on at the Universal parks with the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. And, and it's funny, again, you just mentioned about, the history of the parks. Just in the August of this year, we had Villain Con, Minions Blast. But that building, the very thing you were talking about, that started off as, the Alfred Hitchcock, tribute attraction when Universal Studios Florida opened in June of 1990. So, I love to tell the story about how Universal and Disney, this is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, folks. You don't get, that unique taste of entertainment that you get in Orlando without these two giant mega corporations going head to head and being fiercely competitive with one another. And boy, are we going to see that get exciting in 2025 with the Epic Universe Park, which, by the way, we haven't told people yet what we're calling this podcast. So, Eric, care to do the honors?
For those that might find out through time, my day job, I deal with a thing called SEO, which is search engine optimization. It's, essentially trying to manipulate Google and the other search engines to have your stuff rank. So when naming conventions come around, it's a matter of like, all right, what will actually people be typing in? So I was just kind of looking for it, saying, hey, what do people type in? And listen, there's not going to be any more, this is going to be the highest search trend for Universal coming up, and that's Epic Universe, right? So it only made sense that with launching a new podcast, we are going to change the name or essentially rebrand as an Epic Universal podcast, because that's essentially what we're going to try to do. And we're going to be talking a lot about what's coming up, all things Universal, and let's hope that we can hold up to the name and make this an epic podcast.
And by the way, I want to point out here that even the folks at Universal understand the importance of SEO. Did you notice what they called the park that they're building in Frisco, Texas? Universal Kids. And right. Think about it. You're a parent and you're looking, for some place to take your children, your young children, on a family vacation. So you type in, theme park kids, and bang, what comes up? Universal Kids.
That's actually quite genius in many aspects. Plus, I've listened to Jim Schul on many of the Disney Unpacks, and he's always referencing, the aspect of make it simple. A lot of times when he's talking about like the Hong Kong and the foreign parks, like the name of the actual attraction has to be clear right off the get-go.
Oh, God.
And how can you be any more clear than, hey, this is a theme park made made for kids than a title like that. So that's fairly genius.
Well, but again, I just wanted to reinforce that I think you picked a great name, and so we'll see. All right. So now, again, following, the way we typically, work here at Jim Hill Media, we've done the intro to the show. So we launch into the news segment of the Epic Universal podcast. But even here, we're doing things a little differently. And again, Eric, do you want to explain how we're going to handle the news a little different this time around?
Jim, if you think about it, as a relative newbie, how the heck, at the end of the day, I'm not going to be able to provide as much information when it comes to looking at news and saying, hey, this is what I think, off of previous knowledge and so forth. I'm literally going to be learning as we go. So instead of just saying, hey, let's talk about this news segment, I think it'd be appropriate to grab some headlines and let me present them to you, and we'll find out if it's news or not. Because I know from, reading blogs over the years for Disney, some things are PR pieces that really have no substance. And some things are monumental that are kind of go underneath, the rug, so to speak, and people don't see. So I think when we look at stuff like this, I can present to you and you can present, we'll look at some news and we'll just find out if it is news or not.
There we go, folks. News or not. So what's our first story that you've dug out and want to know if it's news or not?
All right, Jim. So in preparation, I typically just typed in Universal News and so forth to find out what is going on. Truth be told, I tried to keep myself as sheltered until we recorded. I think it's important that I don't go and do a whole bunch of homework, or the premise of this doesn't necessarily work. So when I found, the first thing that really crossed my eye was this Variety.com article that was just a couple days old, and it talks about Universal overtaking Disney as the highest grossing studio of 2023 in the box office. Is that news or is that not news, Jim?
Well, okay. Look, not to talk down what Universal pulled off in 2023. Yes, they wound up, when we look at the worldwide box office, they did $4.9 billion worth of business with the 24 films they released to theaters last year. And they had some hits of size. I mean, they had the Super Mario Brothers movie, which all by itself did $1.3 billion worth of business around the world. They also had Oppenheimer, which, by the way, is marching into award season and looking like it's going to do really, really well come the Academy Awards. That did $952 million worldwide. And at the same time, there were singles and doubles that did especially well, like Megan, the horror film. In fact, what's so interesting about Megan is Megan basically came out a year ago this week. And, did decent business, did 95 million stateside, another 84 overseas for a worldwide box office of 180 million. But again, this was a relatively inexpensive horror film, which now has launched a franchise for Universal. And more to the point, I don't know if you saw any of the footage coming out of this year's Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Orlando, but they actually had a troupe of young ladies who were the Megan dancers who would come
horrifying.
out. Oh, yeah,
Absolutely.
It was, but it was. But yeah, that's how a Universal works. That they had they had this hit in January, and by early September, as part of Halloween Horror Nights, here were these characters in the park, entertaining guests who immediately insisted that, I got to get my picture taken with all these scary Megan girls. But again, this is 24 films that made $4.9 million. Now, if we pivot over to Disney, they made $4.8 billion worldwide with 17 films. And in fact, that's the interesting thing. If you talk with the folks at Disney, they're like, yeah, we damn near did the exact same business, and we did it with fewer titles. But at the same time, there were so many films this year that Disney put out that somehow managed to miss the mark, whether it was the Marvels or in particular Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And what especially hurt was Disney Wish, a film that Disney had been hyping for the better part of the year of, this is sort of, our celebration of 100 years of Disney Studios. And, and the audience was like, yeah, I can wait for this to show up on Disney Plus. And if we're being honest, Eric, that was kind of the mantra with a lot of the films that Disney released to theaters this year, to the effect of an audience had learned. It's like, look, I don't need to go to the theaters. I can wait. This will show up on their subscription streaming service. And that's kind of the barrel Disney is staring down right now. They had sort of built their future on the success of Disney Plus, not anticipating what it would do to theatrical or, for that matter, what it would do for home entertainment. So, it's just, for me, it's fascinating to watch Hollywood history being made in real time. So I guess, long story short, yes, in fact, this was news. Good of you to grab that story.
Well, let's talk about the next story here. And I found this from actually Universal's website themselves. They're just announced the Mardi Gras International Flavors Carnival is coming. It looks to be from February 3rd to April 7th. Now, through the years, I've heard of this Mardi Gras celebration there. It's one of the few things that's kind of transferred over, and I'm like, oh, they have some type of Mardi Gras celebration. So is this like a food and wine, or does this matter? Is this a normal, is it a big draw?
Again, I think you nailed it with your food and wine or flower and garden. I mean, there were things that Universal does that, there are... In fact, this is a piece of language that Mr. Schul taught me. There is this thing called intent to visit. And the notion is, if, someone like yourself who lives in Wheeling, West Virginia, what's going to get you and Lauren to put the kids in the car and drive 16 hours down to Orlando? And it's probably not an event, that features, groups performing and food and Mardi Gras parade floats rolling through the streets. On the other hand, if you're, a Central Florida local, this is the sort of thing that might move the needle for you to go visit during what is traditionally considered the off season. So this is the annual event that Universal has developed over the years, to get the locals to come out, during that time of year when attendance is perhaps softer than Universal would like. Now, that said, I have always enjoyed when I'm down there, watching the Mardi Gras parade roll through the street. That said, I don't like getting hit in the face by by beads being thrown by people who don't know how to throw beads. But on the other hand, it's enjoyable, and but again, it very much like food and wine, there is these are, the new dish that's being introduced, and this is the new beverage. And, so.
All right. Well, here's another thing that kind of breaks my heart a little bit as a collector of paper park maps. Universal Orlando no longer offering paper park maps at theme parks.
Yeah, that came with the new year, though. It's worth noting that in the months just prior to that, Universal had also introduced another, bit of technology. They had started going with facial recognition at the entrance of the parks, and this is, to be completely blunt here, this is Universal getting policies in place at its two legacy parks in Florida that will be opening day procedures, come when Epic Universe throws open its doors in 2025. The notion of, that park is never going to have a paper map, or for that matter, you're not going to need, a physical ticket getting in and out. The setup there when you arrive at the park is, okay, let's see your face, let's see your admission medium, and this is how you get in and out of that park. And do you know where you're going? Do you know, well, if not, pull out your phone and call up the app and, you'll figure out how to get around this park. Now, to be fair here, Disney has been doing the same thing for quite some time. And in fact, I remember when you actually used to be able to walk into a quick service restaurant like Cosmic Rays and make a food order. And, these days it's like, well, did you do it on your phone? And like, no. It's like, ugh, you backwards boob.
Right. I was recently even at a local fast food chain, and there's a line for mobile order in the drive-thru, and I'm like, oh, okay, so now you're ordering. So it's just going that route. Everyone has a phone. As someone who develops websites, I get it. But there is something about the tangible map. I collect them essentially, and I kind of use those as. So it'll be interesting. The fact is, I will never be able to have a universal map unless I go onto eBay, I guess.
Well, and it's so interesting you say that because, I remember when Disney, again, I work off of paper every day. And, I constantly check the old Disney annual reports to get information. And in the 2000s, the Disney company decided we're not going to print physical annual reports anymore. And, and when you think about how, it's always interesting when things that were on the web suddenly aren't on the web anymore.
Right. Sure.
So you have to know what to grab when. And for somebody like myself, it's just sort of like, oh, the physical stuff is going away. And I feel your pain, Eric. I genuinely feel your pain. So
it's all right. I dug this one up from a couple months ago. So it's Universal Theme Parks breaking massive record in 2023. They set records this year, and in general, is that news or is that kind of fluff? What happened here?
Okay. Realistically, out in Hollywood, in February of this past year, we had Super Mario World open on the lower lot at Universal Studios Hollywood. And, that did land office business. People would come into the park and rush down the Starcade. And, I will tell you from Mr. Testa and Mr. Schul and I standing in line for 2 hours to get on the Mario Kart ride. And what was interesting is it broke down while we were in that line, and we were determined to tough it out. It came back up like a half hour later. But that definitely moved the needle out there. They had a 17% year-over-year improvement, when it comes to the amount of money, the revenue that the parks generated. Now, you got to also take into account the amount of money that Universal spent at the parks, and more to the point, the money that is being poured into the absolute giant Epic Universe complex. In fact, this past trip when Eric and I were both down in Florida for the Ginger Snap Challenge thing that Touring Plans did, I actually, one evening, Mr. Schul and I drove over to eyeball the Epic Universe construction project, and the next morning, on my way to the airport, I did the same thing in daylight. And mind you, you could see the tangle of, theme park, a roller coaster track on the horizon. But it's way off of the boulevard there, and you can see the two brand new hotels that sort of anchor the property. But, again, they're pouring money into the future of, this division of the company. In fact, didn't they just in the past year do the same thing Disney did? They changed the names to, what is it, Universal Parks and Experiences or something to that effect? Yeah, so
some change in the names. Yeah, and I'll tell you what, that's the one thing that kind of got me roped in a little bit is you go on YouTube and there's always construction update, and the unsung hero, and I don't know, it's a man of mystery to me, is that Bio Reconstruct. The best pictures, and I just recently watched in preparation. I said, what's going on now? And they just have the new beacons, so to speak, for each land, and that is pretty darn exciting. So
it is, and again, thank you so much for mentioning our eye in the sky there, Mr. Bioreconstruct. But it also worth noting here, it's somebody else who's doing equally heavy lifting, Alicia Stella, with her, what is it, Theme Park Stop. Done some amazing coverage of Universal over the past couple of years. So, kudos to the two of them, sort of keeping us all up to speed about what's going on site there. But yeah, that it's a fascinating, huge project, but also it's only one of four.
Right. The final story that we got here, to see news or not, it's basically a new Universal theme park could be coming to the UK. So that's a pretty big story in itself, but is there any substance there? What do we know about anything?
Okay. And again, I am not allowed to say how I found out, but when we were all down in Florida, in late November, early December for Ginger Snap Challenge, I did find out about the park for the UK. It is legit. I mean, as we know now, but at the same time, half of my job is sometimes somebody will share a story with me and say, you can't tell anybody about this yet. But, it's just sort of like, oh, that's coming. And again, to circle back to your earlier story, about how the Universal parks now have this rich, series of hit films, whether it's Shrek or Trolls or Despicable Me or that sort of thing, to build, theme parks around. That's what's evidently fascinating about what Universal is about to build in the UK. That this is the first park that Mark Woodbury, the former head of Universal Creative, now the head of Universal Parks and Experiences. This is the first park entirely put together on his watch. And Mark is a sincere believer in the idea that Universal is finally in a place where we don't need other people's stuff. We have a lot of great stuff, and we can build parks, entirely out of our own IP. And that's where we are right now. That this is what's fascinating about what's being built in the UK. On the other hand, also worth noting, we have the Universal Kids Park again in Frisco, Texas, which, as we mentioned, also leaning heavily into the Universal catalog, not making use of outside properties to license. And let's also not forget about what's being built in Las Vegas, the Universal Horror Unleashed. Don't know if you've seen any of the pictures of the construction on site there, Eric, but oh my God, the building is up.
That's insane.
Yeah.
You know what's kind of interesting that I think the playbook they're doing that actually has me intrigued as well. So we're actually planning our 2024 travel, my wife and I, and she wants to go to other places besides Central Florida. I don't know what's wrong with her, but nonetheless, the thing is, if I'm a Universal fan, and for instance, we want to go down to Texas to experience Texas for once, or we want to go to Las Vegas, or we want to go to these other places in the United States, boy, do I have an opportunity to say, well, let's travel and let's see some of the sites around these, but also we get to get my fix of theme park entertainment. So, we're right now, if you want theme park entertainment, with Disney, you got one coast, you got down in Florida. But for the most part, I love what Universal is doing because they're finding some tourist hotbeds and they're really going to get some people involved. And if it's kids and they remember one of the first times they traveled in Texas and they went to Universal Park, they're probably going to, become more allegiant to Universal than maybe the people, at Disney. So it's a very interesting playbook.
So interesting you say that, because if you drill down into Disney history, there was a time where Disney was very seriously considering regional theme parks. And the best known one, of course, was the one that was actually announced, Disney's America, which was going to be built in Virginia. But a somewhat lesser known project, but equally real, was, what was it? Disney's Techsposition? They were going to build a regional park in Texas, but in the end, they did the development. They walked right up to the idea and just couldn't turn the key. And in fact, what's especially ironic, I'm sitting here today recording our episode, looking out my picture window at all the snow that's coming down, and that if you Google Disney White Mountain Resort, you will see that once upon a time Disney was going to build a ski chalet up here in New England.
Oh my!
Up in the White Mountains. In fact, what's so funny is that evidently they had a statue of Goofy out in front of the resort, and depending on what time of year you visited the resort, it was either Goofy on a snowboard or Goofy hiking. They would just sort of swap out. Oh, you're here for our summer program. Sure, change the Goofy thing out front. But I guess that's what's fascinating about this is where Disney hasn't dared. Disney has walked up to the edge, and then out of an abundance of caution, all right, we're not going to do that. Universal is boldly stepping forward, whether it's doing this thing in Vegas or if it's doing this, this kids park in Texas. It's such an interesting time to be digging, to be covering Universal and more to the point, that turning around and looking at the mouse and going, okay, so what are you going to do in response to this?
Right. And I'll leave you with this before we head to our commercial break. Harry Potter came around and we got Pandora and Star Wars. Let's just say, if we all go to the park in Texas and we all go to the park in Las Vegas and we all support, maybe somebody will get a little, feisty and say, hey, we need to respond. And maybe we'll get a park in, in DC. Maybe Disney's America could happen. Unlikely, but
you never know. All right. Well, anyway, and as Eric intoed here, it is time now for us to go to commercial here. But when we get back, folks, we have the nice folks at Universal have agreed to sit down with us and talk about the brand new from August of last year, the Villains Con Minion Blast, and we'll learn a bit about that attraction. But first, this.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy, champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
And we're back. Okay, what follows is a Zoom interview that I did just this past week with Carson Luter. He's a member of the Universal creative team that played a key role in the creation of a relatively brand new attraction at Universal Studios Florida. So let's give it a listen to that now. We're here today talking with Carson Luter, Associate Project Manager at Universal Creative, about Villain Con Minion Blast, which opened at Universal Studios Florida back on August 11, 2023. So that was roughly 6 months ago. And Mr. Luter is something of a local, a two-time graduate of the University of Central Florida, where he came away with an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree in themed entertainment management and design. And Carson is also the chair of the Themed Entertainment Association Next Gen program, which seeks to help students and new industry entrants begin to establish their careers in themed entertainment, which is kind of appropriate given that the topic of today's interview, villain Con Minion Blast, makes use of some next-gen tech. So thank you, Carson, for agreeing to come on to the show today. And let's just jump into it then. Okay. Universal Studios Florida's first Despicable Me attraction, Minion Mayhem, opened back in June of 2012. And, we saw later on, that, the Minion characters came a little bit more into the park. I mean, I want to say that same summer we saw the Universal Superstar Parade, and Gru and the girls, became walkarounds in the park. But have to ask, after more than a decade, why did park management suddenly decide to sort of expand this IP's footprint at the park?
So, and that's a good point. Since 2012, Minions and Despicable Me, and now growing into the larger Illumination family. It's one of our marquee intellectual properties that we have as a company, right? And case in point, 2012, this attraction opened, the original Minions attraction, Minion Mayhem. The Minion train has not slowed down. Since then, we've had 2 just box office hit Minion films. There's been 2 more Despicable Me's and a 4th one on the way. This attraction gave us specifically the opportunity to tell a story centered more around the movie that had most recently come out, which was Minions 2, and specifically the story of the Vicious Six.
Got it. Okay, now, but Minions Land, the what this part of the Parks Whole production corridor, this is a really busy piece of real estate within Universal Studios Florida. I mean, it's just steps away from the park's entrance, not to mention, in fact, every year when I come down for Halloween Horror Night, I love that sort of, that highlight reel that you guys set up at the front of the park that teases all of the mazes. But that's typically right there in the throat of the park. And were there any concerns, given what you were about to do with this part of the park, sort of taking, Despicable Me Minion Mayhem across the street there and suddenly creating a land that would march back all the way to where the old Universal Monsters Cafe was? What were the conversations like about that?
So, for Horror Nights, it helps that our attraction isn't open during Horror Nights, and neither is just Minion Mayhem. So that certainly helps. I couldn't imagine trying to operate. There's, I think, 3 or 4 maze entrances, one right up next to Despicable Me, Minion Mayhem, and then more in the Universal Amphitheater courtyard too, right? So that helps. We have Mardi Gras coming up, and if anything, we gave people a nice shaded spot to watch the parade go by on the street, because that kind of overhang area used to be Shrek Q, and now it's kind of open and people can stand there and watch the parade. So that's a good benefit.
Well, I'm so glad you brought up the Universal Orlando's Mardi Gras celebration, which, by the way, gets underway this year on February 3rd. I've actually been in the park after hours. In fact, it was so interesting. That it was during Halloween Horror Nights, but that was the night where evidently they were training Universal's float drivers to get the Christmas float through the park. And it was just sort of bizarre to see the Halloween decorations up and the Christmas floats rolling through the park. But I have to ask, given that, for example, you've got that wonderful bit of placemaking at the front of the park there, the new Minion sign with all of the Minions and climbing all over it. And does that intrude at all into the parade float path at all? Or I guess what I'm asking is, did you guys, as you were designing Minion Land, have conversations with your entertainment team about what their needs were versus what you guys were planning on doing in the land?
Oh, yeah. And, anything we do that we know is going to have inputs back on our park operators, specifically for this, you're referencing entertainment. We work that with them super early on and then continue all throughout the entire length of the project. And, we did want to add this great new Minion Land marquee, right?
It's lovely. I mean, you guys really did a great job. Though, again, just quick follow-up question here, because I've seen the bead tree on the way to the parking garage, and I look, who's going to be responsible each night to climb up on the Minion Land sign and clear off the beads? Because people are going to throw beads in that thing.
Yeah, maybe I'll volunteer to do a couple nights out there this year.
There we go. Okay. All right. So now to get back to the Villain Con, attraction itself. I mean, face it, you guys built this while the rest of Universal, Studios Florida was open, and a lot of tech had to go into this thing, and then what was it like to have to build, again, an attraction inside of a pre-existing building that, again, previously had the Shrek 4D thing in it, but at the same time, and I think we were talking about this when we were pre-gaming today's show, in the middle of the pandemic.
This is a great question, and this is kind of like a underrated thing that a lot of people don't think about. So, some attraction project, like let's talk about, let's say Hagrid's, right? Hagrid's is convenient because it backs up to the edge of the existing guest park space. We were unique with Minion Blast because on all sides is park. So it was a little island in the middle of the park, a fully operating theme park, right? And we're, trying to get gear in and walking through the park every day. So I remember a lot of walks out there with project team members every day, every morning, going to our early whiteboard meetings, through the operating park. And I think kind of halfway through, I was like, man, I really hope my next project butts up to like a backstage entrance, so I don't have to just walk through. Sometimes pushing like heavy carts of like gear out into the building and taking things out.
The other thing that people don't understand about a situation like that is, you have to whatever you've hauled out that day, and working within the attraction. That's pretty much all you can use, right? Because the park is operating. It's not like you can be hauling big chunks of equipment into your construction site, right?
Yeah, and that's why we do a lot of our stuff overnight. So pretty much that window, and even overnight is not really overnight, because there's a point in time where we're letting in early park admission, or some other department within the park needs that space to do refurbishment work or something like that. So there were a lot of nights where we had a super short window to get in there, get our gear in, and get out, right? And then spend the morning working on it.
Well, again, totally impressive, finished product. But that said, I mean, look, Villain Con Minion Blast literally features a lot of moving parts. And once the physical construction of the attraction was complete, I mean, how long did it take to? You've got a moving walkway and your blasters, and which then have to sync up with animation on screen. How long was the test and adjust on this?
So I think we closed Shrek 4D in January of 22, I think. January 22. So we did a pretty short demo period. We kept the shell of the existing building, not much demo to do. And then from there, we were kind of full installing mode. The thing that took a lot of time, right, is our interactive gaming system and our interactive gaming technology. So there were a kind of core, the department that I work with and contributed a lot to this attraction is called Advanced Technology and Interactives, which is a subdivision of Universal Creative, and also encompasses our R&D group as well. So there were a kind of the final 6 to 8 months of us on site. We actually worked upstairs in the second floor of the building. We set up tables and computers and everything. And there was like kind of a little like ATI, Advanced Tech and Interactives strike force that was out there every day working with the blasters, doing cycles, just going again and again and again, trying to, I was syncing audio, we were syncing gameplay, blaster tracking, everything. A little group of us, Bill, Elise, Jason, Rachel, and Bly, to be specific, this little crack team that we had out there that were really doing cycles and making sure everything was working properly.
Well, I mean, the end product is crazy impressive. Though, I just to the side, because you were talking earlier about how Minion Land really also celebrates, the films of Illuminations. I mean, you have the meet and greets, area that, where we see characters from Sing and, that sort of thing. Can you talk a bit about, the collaboration between the folks, the animators and the artists over at Illumination? I mean, did they actually create the gaming footage for this, or did you?
So they were extremely involved. I was talking to them probably every day, which is a unique relationship to have with an intellectual property holder. They love this theme park stuff. They want to be as involved as possible. So we, pretty much the entire cycle of this project was spent with 5 or 6 representatives from Illumination, right? Constantly giving input, feedback. They had 2 writers that wrote pretty much every joke that's in the attraction, because so much of their brand is their humor. So they were trying to instill as much of their brand of humor into the attraction as possible, which obviously we loved, and I think the guests have really responded to. They gave us a dedicated animation director from Illumination side specifically to work with all the media that you see in the queue, and then the media that you do see in the gaming, the interactive portion of the attraction. We had a dedicated producer, and then we had one of the executive producers of Minions 2 involved as well. So it was definitely not only important from our side, but important from their side that their brand was upheld, right? And I think that we did it justice.
Just to sort of step back for a moment, what's lovely is not just Villain Con Minion Blast, but Minion Land has so many wonderful nods to the Illumination films. In fact, I love that you guys actually, over the entrance to the Bank of Evil, put the chairman up there. No, I mean, as somebody who's been a big fan of the Despicable Me franchise since the first film dropped back in July of 2010. I mean, it's so much fun to be in that space. But now getting back to Villain Con Minion Blast, now that this show building was previously home to 2 Universal Studios Florida attractions. There was the Alfred Hitchcock, The Art of Making Movies, and then, of course, as you mentioned earlier, Shrek 4D. And I was keeping an eye open as I was making my first trip through a Minion Blast. And are there any acknowledgments or nods to the building's previous tenants, either in the animation elements or the propping of the building?
Yes, there are. And actually, I'll give you a third kind of, since I know that, this show is pretty inside baseball. I'll give you a third special Easter egg for Universal fans that I think some people have learned about. So Hitchcock, yes. So in the exterior queue media, there is a nice piece of art that we had done that shows, you go to Villain Con, you go to a convention, it's so much about cosplay. So there's a piece of art in the queue media that shows characters dressed up as, famous villains throughout history. And there's a baby dressed up as Mother Bates from Psycho.
Oh, no. Okay.
So keep an eye out for that. And then,
all right.
As for Shrek, we specifically took the design of a certain castle and included that in one of the interactive scenes. So keep an eye out for that.
Okay.
And then one that I personally pushed for and kind of made sure happened There is a infamous announcement that plays on moving walkway as you enter City Walk from the parking garage. Moving walkway, exit is approaching. Please watch your step. If you've been to Universal, you've heard this 1,000 times. We knew since we were going to have a moving walkway, we knew that we kind of wanted to get this certain individual who did this original recording back in probably 1998 or whatever, 1999. Who's still with the company.
Really?
To come back and do our the moving walkway exit is approaching. Please watch your step announcement. So we got him back and made one key change. We decided the villain walkway exit is approaching instead of the moving walkway. So there's a nice in joke for Universal.
That's fun. That's fun. Okay, cool. I guess the other irony here is that, again, if you're a film fan, you know that Alfred Hitchcock made a point of, in his movies, in fact, he was kind of the guy who introduced the idea of the Easter egg. He would make a cameo in every one of his films. And, so taking that in mind and, given how dense this attraction is, I mean, that's the thing that I think that impressed me the most about this attraction is all of the villains that appear in this thing. They're on model. I mean, crazy on model from the Illumination films. But at the same time, there is just so much going on. I mean, the repeatability of this ride has to be off the scale, because you get off the thing and you feel like, I didn't see it. I didn't see it all. I got to get back in line. But that said, having been as hands-on as you were with this project and working, as closely as you did with the folks at Illuminations, do you have a favorite room or a favorite section of Con Minion Blast?
So, and hearkening back to what you just said about repeatability, early on, we knew that we wanted that repeatability to drive this attraction. It's something that, Victor Lugo, who's our director of immersive experience, who kind of is part of the early development of all these interactive type of attractions. That's something that he certainly pushed for and made sure that we were going to do. And that Illumination also was very excited about. So my favorite room in the attraction, probably a lot of people's favorite rooms in the attraction, is the big finale scene that takes place at Universal, right? With the Pharaoh's Lighthouse from Hell's Adventure, Toothsome Shark and Emporium, the Universal Globe, the Universal Arch, and the Krakatoa volcano from Volcano Bay. And you're battling, these four villains from the Despicable Me and Minions films at Universal. It's kind of this meta moment that Evan and Van, who are the writers from Illumination, were super passionate early on about, like, we want this moment to happen, and they kind of got their wish, which is great. So the amount of time that you're in that scene in the attraction, you might not get to see all four of the villains. So literally, you're going to have to go back and ride again just so you can see, Scarlet or Brat or whichever villain you missed, right? Because there's so much content in that room that you're not even guaranteed in the 45 seconds or whatever that you're in just that room to see them. So you got to come back and fight them again, right?
Got it. Okay, one final question before we close here, because face it, you've got to have friends and family. I mean, you're obviously proud of the attraction you had a hand in, and you've got friends and family who go through it. So, but again, you want to help out. You want your friends and family to do well, when they're in Minion Blast. So is there any specific tip that you share with folks? If you want them to get maybe a better score than they might initially get on their first pass through?
So the thing that we tell a lot of guests who are coming to the attraction is to look out for these collectibles. And you'll notice them because they have a glowing rainbow border, and those are actually worth the most points. And sometimes you have to do secret things, hidden things in the game to unlock them, to uncover them. But definitely keep an eye out for those, because those are worth a lot of points. The biggest thing that I'll say, though, if you're not using the Universal Orlando app, which has an embedded VillainCon game component, please do that, because the amount of extra things that it unlocks, and this Illumination was very, very excited and passionate about, to the point that they wrote pretty much the entire, we have hundreds of jokes in the attraction, and there's 300 more in just the app alone from the Illumination writing team. Names of things, names of achievements and missions and everything. They came up with all of that.
Wow.
But it changes the way that you play the game, because you can get upgrades to your blaster, to all components of your blaster, your launchers, your ultimates, and your seasonals, right? And it takes you from an average player to a player that's going to be consistently on that nice leaderboard that we have in the exit retail every day, right? It's going to get you into the 1 million+ point club, which is kind of the what we're looking at is a pretty good score if you're hitting over 1 million.
Okay, so now I see my mistake, because again, I just walked in the door, picked up a blaster, and again, I'm not exactly the king of hand-eye coordination. But now I know. Okay, so next time I'm in the park, I will fire up the app and make sure I get set up. But again, so looking forward to going back to the park and once again getting a chance to do battle with Bell Bottom and Jean-Claude. So, Carson, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. And more to the point, please pass along our congratulations to the entire Villain Con Minion Blast team for a job really, really well done. I mean, face it, that there was a popular show there before with Shrek 4D, but you guys have topped that. And more to the point, we have this lovely new land right at the front of the park.
Yeah. Much appreciated. We were a super, super small team on a nice tight timeline to get this thing open. And we're all very, very proud of the outcome and the attraction and the reaction that guests are taking away from experiencing it.
So what do you think, Eric? Does Villain Con Minion Blast sound like something you and the family would like to check out during your initial visit to the Universal Orlando Resort?
Jim, I think truthfully, that's right up our alley. We've been very much fans of the Buzz Lightyear on both coasts, for that matter. We just tried out the web slingers, and like you said, those are just some of the most repeatable rides. Literally, we have got off of Buzz, turned right back around, and got back on. So I could see that happening here, and it's very innovative technology, like the whole walkway. So I could see that being, one that not only the 6, the 17-year-old, and the 13-year-old all pretty much love.
Well, again, but the key difference between Buzz and the Spider-Man attraction at DCA, again, you're standing up with your blaster, and I got to tell you, it is a different experience. Oh, by the way, folks, we're kind of burying the lead here, because to be honest, that's one of the main goals of the Epic Universal podcast. We're using this show to help get the Herseys ready for their first ever visit to the Universal Orlando Resort, and which brings us to where you folks come in. We're, in essence, looking to crowdsource some of Eric's questions here, like this one.
All right, here's what I need your guys' help with. Literally, we're going to go to Universal, but we need to know how much time. I really need to know how much time we should actually spend at Universal Orlando to kind of get the most out of the resort.
Okay, now please note that Mr. Hersey said resort. How much time will his family need to make the most of their time? Again, we're not talking about the parks. We're talking about the resort. Though that in itself is a great question as well. One we should probably save for another show. How much time do you think the Herseys are going to need to do Universal Studios Florida, Island Adventure, and Volcano Bay? Right. But
right now, we're just kind of looking to see, I need your guys' help, some thoughts when it comes to, how much time the family and I should be spending at Universal Orlando Resort, just really to make sure we have a right, memorable vacation, because you only have one chance to do it, have the first impression, to do it right.
There we go. And you just mentioned your kid's age, but just a quick recap, because we blew by it quick.
We got a 17-year-old son, a 13-year-old daughter, a 6-year-old son. We also typically take the grandma we won't give her age, and my wife and I. So we got ourselves a nice, I like to say it's like the touring plans, like the levels. When you go through the survey and there, you're like, how many have on this, and we kind of hit the whole gambit there.
You do. Well, okay. So that's a good start. And speaking of starting, the Epic Universal podcast is only just getting started, folks. Thanks again to the very nice people over at Universal for allowing Carson Luter to come on our inaugural episode, and we're hoping to do a number of interviews like that in the future. So if you have questions about the Universal Orlando Resort
or Universal Studios Hollywood, we plan on taking a part to the Universal Parks and Experience on upcoming shows as well.
That's true. And by the way, if you like Disney Dish, the podcast I do with Len Testa, well, that's kind of our long-term goal for the Epic Universal podcast. We're looking for this show to be a balance, between the latest news about what's going on in Orlando and Hollywood.
Not to mention, Jim, Las Vegas, Texas, wherever else they decide, maybe UK.
Very true. Plus, again, who knows? Maybe a story or two about the Universal Parks in Japan and Singapore and Beijing. In fact, just today, there was all this amazing coverage coming out of Universal Japan that they had their last day of operation of the Spider-Man, or to the Amazing Spider-Man attraction at that park, and did a lovely job of sort of paying tribute to the crew. Tell you what, we'll try to talk about that on the next show. But anyway, folks, what Eric and I hope is going to make this show different from all of the other Universal podcasts out there is that you get to be part of the conversation here, largely because we're looking for your help when it comes to helping the Herseys plan their very first trip to the Universal Orlando Resort.
Right. And not only that, if you guys reach out to me, we'll be sharing some of those insights on the next installment. So when you write to us, we'll be talking about it. We'll be using a lot of your tips, tricks, and information to make this show kind of carry on.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that, in theory, will be happening in just 2 weeks' time. I mean, that's the plan anyway. So thanks for listening. And speaking of listening, I want to remind you we have a bunch of other podcasts here at Jim Hill Media we'd love for you to check out. They include the aforementioned Disney Dish with Len Testa. There's also Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor. That's our animation news podcast. Plus, Looking at Lucasfilm with Brian Gahn, which shines a spotlight on all things Star Wars. And we're also looking at reviving Marvelous Disney, our Marvel news podcast, though that will likely happen further on down the line.
Right. And don't forget Disney Unpacked.
Oh, how could I forget our first ever video series? The one that we're doing over on Patreon with Mr. Testa and veteran Imagineer Jim Schul. This month's episode has been about Mickey's Birthday Land, whereas next month's episode of Disney Unpacked, which debuts on Sunday, February 4th, it's kind of a sequel to that show. It deals with the development and construction of Mickey's Toontown out in California. And by the way, when I say we, I don't mean the royal we. I'm talking about myself and Mr. Hersey. After we lost Aaron Adams, our longtime editor here, this past Thanksgiving, Eric was kind enough to step in and start writing herd on the editorial side of Jim Hill Media and Disney Unpacked. So if you like what you're listening to right now, well, you have Mr. Hersey to thank. Okay, so I think that's going to do it for the very first Epic Universal podcast. We hope you like what you heard here.
All right, more to the point, we welcome your input. Like we said it before, input and feedback. We want to hear from you. This experience will be so much better if we get some of you, the Universal fans out there that know what you're talking about, to join Jim and train me, so to speak.
Now, okay, before we close here, we have to do the social media thing. So where can folks find you, Eric?
Honestly, guys, let's make it real easy. Find me on X. Name is Eric Hersey, EricHersey. Send me all of your Universal information there. Help me plan our trip. And Jim, where can we find you at?
The usual. Again, I'm old. I call it Twitter, but yes, X. Likewise, Instagram as Jim Hill Media, and over on Facebook as Jim Hill Media News.
So hit us both up. Let us know if you like the show, what you want to hear on the show. And Mr. Hill and I will be back in 2 weeks' time. But till then, take care.